be able to reflect with people. I have an apology to make, which is Jonathan Wittenberg contacted me that he's got a very bad flu. Lots of people wanted to hear, but some things are beyond control. So, oh, you can't hear? No. I had a phone call from Jonathan Creeger to apologise that he's really got bad flu. He's not at all well. Lots of people wanted to hear him. We will make sure there's another opportunity that he's not well, and we will share your words.
Okay, I'm going to try the mic. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's wonderful to see so many of you here for what promises to be a fascinating, thought-provoking conversation as we approach Yom Kippur. Our theme tonight is Shver Zayn. It's hard to be a Jew. And we're fortunate to have with us a remarkable panel. 2 rabbis, a comedian and a journalist. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere. They will share their insights into challenges facing Jews, Judaism and the Jewish people today. Guiding us through the conversation is someone ideally placed for the task, Emily Kasriel. Emily is an award-winning journalist, broadcaster and international facilitator. She has led and hosted programmes for the BBC, and her work has been featured across the media. She's also deeply engaged in the art of dialogue, founding and directing initiatives that bring people together across divides and working extensively on themes of listening, empathy and understanding. Emily is also the author of a powerful new book on deep listening, exploring how really hearing one another can help us build empathy, reduce conflict and strengthen human connections. With her gift for asking insightful questions and drawing out different voices, Emily is the perfect guide for this evening's conversation with Rabbi Jonathan, Rabbi Joel, and Rachel Creeger. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Emily Kasriel.
Thank you so much. Louise, can everybody hear me? Is the mic good? Yes. Yeah, fantastic. Well, really, really delighted to be here, and I hope this is going to be such an amazing, insightful evening, which also is perhaps much needed at this time. And Jonathan was just saying he really wanted this to be a place for open, honest discussion. So at the end of our session, you guys will be the ones to judge and let us know how we've done. So on our panel, we have Rabbi Joel Levy, who is the rabbi of Kol Nefesh Mazorti and also the Rosh of the Conservative Yeshiva in Jerusalem. And he was just saying, as we're having this difficult moral discussion here, he's also on his mind his daughter, who is in fatigues in Israel, and he's worried for her safety, like all parents of people who are in the army there. We also have Rachel Creeger, who styles herself on Instagram as the only practicing Orthodox Jewish woman on the UK comedy circuit, and multi-award-winning stand-ups many times in the Edinburgh Fringe, and we'll be looking for her for insights, for her own experiences, and also to ensure that we have some comic moments in this evening as well. And as well, of course, no need to introduce Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, the rabbi of our community here, and we'll see how we go. So I thought I would... it's kind of interesting, actually, this Shver Zayn idea. It's hard to be a Jew. Morally hard in terms of identity, and also all the many tough experiences that everybody in this room has encountered this year being a Jew. Actually, the title comes from a Yiddish comedy, which was written about the challenging relationships between Jews and non-Jews in the Russian Empire. But this is also a precious moment between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, a time to look inward and a time of reflection. And all of us are grappling with these complex and difficult feelings inside us and also between us. Because of course it's been 2 years since the tragic massacres on October 7th, and huge issues facing us as Jews and as community. The direction of the Israeli government in Gaza and the West Bank, the fate of the hostages, now 2 years in captivity, the pummeling of Gaza and the humanitarian crisis there, the rise of anti-Semitism in Athens, Melbourne, and of course here, and and of the far right in the US, in Europe, and again here. And then the deep divisions within communities and within families. And I'm aware that there's also a lot of different opinions here in this room, and no doubt on our panel as well. And also perhaps the extent of fear and alienation, and the extent in which many people have felt alone this past year. But I also hope in this hour that it won't be all gloom, that our panellists will shed light on how we as individuals and as a community can help navigate this moment, and what can inspire us and give us hope. So I wanted to ask each of our panellists in turn to tell me about one moment when you found it really hard to be a Jew this year. Let me kick off with you, John.
Is this working? Yes. The aeroplane journey between Israel and UK is probably my hardest space, because Israelis and Brits, even Jews, inhabit such different worlds at the moment, and we get different news, we hear different stories, we live in different worlds. That's not airtight. I know many Jews here who are Israeli in that sense. They've kind of sealed themselves off from the news here and are living an Israeli existence. And the airplane journey is hard because I have to transition in some way, and I can get it wrong. And when I get it wrong, going in either direction, I can sound like a lunatic, because the breakdown of communication is so profound, and the possibility of like communicating well is so limited at this stage, that for me I'm having to juggle myself, juggle my attitudes, and juggle my core beliefs in a way, when I'm transitioning between the two worlds that I inhabit at the moment.
So it's that transition, it's the difficulty of having the two identities, and that moment in the plane, or the 5 hours in the plane, is encapsulates that two yous that needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, like, we can take the question of like what it's hard to be a Jew. We can take it in so many different ways, as you said. Like that's difficult identity-wise. I think we'll have plenty of time during the course of the evening to think about the moral quandaries of being a Jew at the moment. But for me, the holding different worlds and being able to move through different worlds is very difficult.
Thank you. And you, Rachel, what's one moment that encapsulates for you why in the last year it's hard to be a Jew?
I'm very loud, so you won't have a problem with me at the microphone. I'm originally from Essex, we're very loud people. I think for me, as a Jew working in the entertainment industry, and specifically in comedy, a moment would be, and it's a repeated moment over the past 2 years, is being either backstage or in the wings about to come on stage, and having the comedian before me or the MC of the gig make a very anti-Semitic / anti-Zionist joke, because they'll see that as a differentiation. We can discuss that through the evening. And then I've got to come on stage and make a room full of people love me who hate me. So, or who might have been purrive about me. And then I've got to undo what's happened before I step on stage, before I can get to just entertaining them in some way. And I've dealt with it by being quite aggressively Jewish. I mean, I'm a bit go big or go home on this. And I think every time that happens, and actually it's not even so much what that individual person says, so much as the reaction of the audience. Because if the audience is uncomfortable, I think, great, I don't have to worry about that because they thought that was inappropriate, it wasn't very funny. If the audience claps, then that's when it's hard to be a Jew for me.
So you're having to carry this extra burden. You're standing up, which for most people will be pretty scary. A lot of people where you've got to make them laugh and there's a lot of pressure on you. But
I don't find that bit scary, that bit's nice, that's fun. But my old Instagram about before, I'm the only Orthodox Jew on the professional comedy circuit, the only one. That means I represent all kinds of things, all kinds of people that I've never purported to represent to anybody. And that's audiences, that's peers, that's clubs, that's promoters, that's journalists, that's, you know, and of course our community. And none of us can get anything right, can we, for anybody, because that's our genetics. So, yeah, that's a hard space to hold right now.
Great, thank you so much. And Jonathan, what's the one moment, and I'm sure there's so many moments.
I just want to express my respect for what you just said and the fact that you're with us and my appreciation. So again, you know, you get a thought for the day. You never know when you're going to be asked to do it. Last year they asked me at short notice to take the 7th of October. You worry about it. I absolutely love my Judaism. I want to be completely loyal to being Jewish. I've also 3 times been given Yom Ha'atzmaut and always asked for a change of date. But I also have to be impartial. It's very carefully edited, and it's really important to be a Jewish voice that's listenable to everybody. And then it doesn't matter what the feedback is, for everything I've written and everything I've said in public, I go home and in the middle of the night, I feel rubbish. Again and again and again and again. And sometimes it's because I feel I've been too far to the left, and sometimes it's feel I haven't been far enough and too far to the right, and it depends on my mood. But the number of times I've just felt rubbish. And the moment you put your head over the pulpit and they say, Rabbi so-and-so, one's not just representing the Jewish people now in some way, one's also seen as representing Israel.
Wow, that sounds really tough, and it doesn't get easier.
Please God, it will.
Well, we promised you some hope in the discussion today. I was wondering, Joel, for you, because you were talking about the difficult moments, the hours in the aeroplane when you're navigating these 2 worlds. And as somebody who does navigate these 2 worlds, you're mostly in Israel and you're in London once a month or so, you were saying, and representing the yeshiva, the Rosh of the yeshiva in Israel, in Jerusalem, and a community here in London. How are you, whether there's 2 different Joels, or whether you feel you can still, there's one Joel inside who can be in both places, how does it work?
No, I think we've all learned not to say the things that can't be said. Like there are things that are unsayable in different contexts, which is very difficult because there are things that need to be said. So let me just dive into something, and then I'll say something from an Israeli perspective, or with my Israeli hat on, and then we'll see that it's an impossible thing to say. Yeah, so that it's an impossible thing to say. So, with my Israeli hat on, I would say that in some way these are the good times. Because our great-grandparents would have given their right arm to have lived in a world where Jews have power. And literally, I think they would have given their right arm. So I think I think our great-grandparents who lived before the foundation of the State of Israel would have given their right arm to live in our world, where Israel is the dominant military power of the Middle East. It's unthinkable. And the moral quandaries that we have in Israel are the moral quandaries of power, not the moral quandaries of weakness. And that's the major shift. I'm not a politician, so I don't have to think about things on a day-to-day basis, but on a decade-by-decade basis, or as hundreds of years pass by, the major shift that's taken place in the Jewish world is that the Jews live with the moral quandaries of being a people with power, immense military power, as opposed to the moral quandaries of whether we cheat on our wives, or what food we eat, or whether we keep the Sabbath. And those are the moral quandaries that normal nations have. Which are the moral quandaries of how do you use the power at your discipline, how do you dispose of power. And that's a phenomenal place to be. That's the place I want to be. That's where I want to be. I want to be living with the guilt of what it means to dispose of immense military power. And so that's good. That's a good place to be. So it doesn't feel great. But it doesn't feel great because we now have power. I think
No, you use the term we, but it doesn't often feel like, who is the we? Is it the Israeli government? Is it Israelis? Is it Jews around the diaspora? Who has the power?
I would say that B'toch ani anochi yoshayit. Like I dwell amongst my people. Like I'm a Jew and I'm loyal to Judaism. It doesn't mean I agree with anything that the Israeli government does. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about I see the world as a Jew. I look at it through a Jewish lens. I identify with the sins of my people. I'm part of that. I want loyalty. I will atone on Yom Kippur for the sins of my people. And I think we should all atone for the sins of our people. Because they're our sins too. And so that's a great moral weight to carry, but that's the moral burden of normality, of being normal amongst the nations. That's the moral challenge of any nation. And it feels both tremendous and appalling at the same time, as it should. And so that's where I'm holding.
I'm wondering, Jonathan, what your thoughts are as a leader of a community and of a movement here in the UK.
That's eloquently said, and it's important. And I remember some years ago talking to you, and you said, at least fellow Jews are not being killed by the tens of thousands every day. And that phrase stuck with me from years ago in a conversation with you. I worry about an aspect of it, because again and again in the Jewish textual tradition, particularly in the prophetic tradition, there's an understanding that force alone is an inadequate protection, and that ultimately survival depends also on morality. I mean, you could produce so many passages from the Torah onwards, and the reliance on force, justly used and sometimes unjustly used. We have plenty of texts which say it has its moral comeuppance, and that really, really frightens me. And the certainty, as it were, that Israel will always be the more powerful militarily is not something which is part of the foundations of Judaism. And interestingly, it's not something I've said because I feel this is my people. I've been in Israel more since the 7th of October than I have in any other period since I was in my 20s, and I consider it an important time for people, whatever their politics, but including the centre and the left, to strengthen the ties with Israel because our people needs us. But I've also heard people say to me, I want a Judaism which is Judaism and which is not identified with Israel, but identified with Judaism. So I just say I've heard that voice. I think these things are inseparable personally, but I've heard that voice.
It's worse than that though, because your moral voice might be necessary in Israel. That's part of what I was talking about, the difficulty of the transition. Israelis at this point are broadly, I'm not going to say everyone, but broadly speaking, not troubled by the deaths of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Because, now I'm obviously making a generalisation, but what was evoked by the October the 7th atrocities was a profound sense of social solidarity and a profound sense that the purpose of the State of Israel is that this shouldn't happen and that we're going to ensure that it doesn't happen again, and a profound sense of responsibility for every single one of the hostages that we will do. It could be your brother or your sister or your mother, and a huge amount of energy and effort is going into thinking about and maintaining in the forefront of people's minds the welfare of those 20 living people. And at the same time, more than 20 Palestinians are being killed every day. And that's where you can't fight a war and hold up in front of your face the images of children being killed. But the diaspora jury can.
I think so. Also, I'm very struck by the fact that large numbers of Israelis now are, and also there have been pictures of Palestinians holding up Israeli and Palestinian children. Having said what you say about the hostages, I think many of them now feel betrayed by their own government. And my fear is that suffering doesn't go nowhere. What is going to be bred in the coming generations out of the misery? What hatred? There's this Yeats poem of this monster yet to be born creeping towards Bethlehem. And that's an image I've often thought about. And I worry that the notion that the ideology of Hamas, with which there is no negotiation, and Hezbollah is the same. And by the way, I think there's a huge difference between what's happening in Gaza and Israeli action against Hezbollah and Iran. And it may be proved that the military action against Iran was a stupendous victory. But these things will have their terrible fruits in the time to come. And that really disturbs me.
And that moral sensitivity is like, if the Jewish people is functioning properly, that voice is alive and kicking. It's alive and kicking. Like the most tragic thing that's happening in the Jewish world at the moment is that the siloing of the Jewish world means that we're not listening to each other at all. And the diaspora can't hear Israel, and Israel can't hear the diaspora. That's part of what I was saying about the journey. So what would it mean for Israelis to hear you saying that? What would it mean for Jews in the diaspora to empathetically listen to Israelis? And for that conversation to be part of the worldwide Jewish conversation? Like, that's what's needed. That's tragic. The tragedy isn't that there's a tragedy in the midst of the Jewish people that we're, despite spending 2,000 years of finely tuning our capacity for listening carefully in Jewish study, we're proving ourselves profoundly inept at listening to each other when the chips are down, when we really need to listen to each other.
I'm wondering, I'm just going to your work, Rachel, because often comedy can help create listening, and all the work that I've done in helping people in polarised contexts listen to each other. What do you think that your work, and also you as community leaders, can do to ensure that listening to people we disagree with becomes more normalised? That that when we listen, it does not mean that we agree. And so many people believe it does, especially young people, by the way.
I'll tell you a little story. I'm guessing a lot of people here will be aware about what happened to me during this year's Edinburgh Fringe, that my show was cancelled by its venue 2 weeks before the Fringe for 3 reasons: too long didn't read, anti-Semitism. And what people might not entirely be aware of is there was actually quite a prolonged campaign of anti-Semitism towards me from a few weeks before the Fringe right up until the end. Not all of it was in the public domain. And so elements of it were publicised, including the venue that eventually took me in had big signs outside with all the show listings on, and the word Jew was burned out of the title of my show. I had someone in the second venue, a member of their staff, we don't know who was telling people that the show wasn't on there, like providing disinformation to prevent people coming. It's all been very dramatic. But from when it was announced 2 weeks before the Fringe that myself and my comedy partner Philip Simon, our shows have been ejected by one particular venue, and then a week later his solo show was then thrown out of a second venue, a neighbouring venue. Normally we both have shows in both venues, as it happens this year, I only had one in the one. I was honestly expecting the comedy community, who are, I was going to say they're extremely left-wing, I'm pretty left-wing, they're extremely liberal, I'm extremely liberal. I was expecting them, because of the nature of their very performative, with very limited understanding of this whole situation, the way that they speak about the Middle East, about Gaza, about Israel. I was honestly expecting to become even more of a pariah than I already am. I lost around 80% of my club work since the war broke out. It would be very hard to pin that on anything, because clubs get huge numbers of applications for every gap, and I'm sure they just say, no, out of all the people who applied for that spot that we used to book you for, someone more talented applied for that. It would be very hard to quantify it. I can only tell you in the figures in terms of my bookings. But when this happened with the Fringe, what was interesting is the majority of the comedy world immediately went, this is racism, it's disgusting. They completely saw beyond the politics of it, and they saw to the heart of it as racism. But then what was interesting is when we arrived in Edinburgh, we'd be walking the streets and we'd bump into other comedians, quite a number of them came up to me and said, terrible what's happened to you, I'm so sorry, they'd hug me, whatever, and then they'd say, and it's not even as if you're a Zionist. Which I found really fascinating, and it also shows how much they don't listen to me, or anything I say. And whereas with Philip, is quite vocal on his social media, and he talks a lot about the hostages, and he talks a lot about the government and whatever, and his politics. And he and I have very similar politics, but for a huge number of quite personal reasons, I decided long ago not to use my social media for anything like that. I'll talk personal things about me directly, but I've got family in all kinds of places doing all kinds of things, and they're very findable through me. They didn't ask for there to be attention on them, so I try and keep things, away from them. And so when they said this to me, it's not as if you're a Zionist, initially I was a bit thrown by it, and then I started responding to them, and I said, I think that you misunderstand that word, and the way that it was actually, in trying to see something positive in this, I sometimes feel the fact of what I do is so unlikely that there has to be a higher power. You don't believe in God for any other reason. Me being a comedian is another reason. Because it makes no sense at all. Like, to have started working in an industry which is all focused around Friday nights that I can't do and all of that, it's all crazy. But it was saying that I started replying to them, and I thought maybe I've been put into this position to have these conversations. So I said, I'm an Orthodox Jew, so therefore I'm a Zionist in my practice, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. And they said, in what way? And I said, well, for example, in our prayers, and I pray numerous times of the day, we talk about the safety of all the inhabitants of that land. We don't say just the Jews, or even, just the Jews related to me. Some of them need a lot of help. We say, that's my defence mechanism, because this is hard. We say for everybody, as we pray for everyone, and for over 2,000 years, not only do we pray about Israel or for Israel, we stand to pray in the direction of Israel. And I said, but that's Israel, not the state of Israel, not the government of Israel. It's Israel, the indigenous homeland of my community that our religion is born from. And I said, and to me, that's my Zionism. And my Zionism is very like lovey-dovey, hippy-dippy, peace and flowers and everyone's friends. I'm not a very complicated person. I don't like war. I'd rather there wasn't any. I'd rather everyone was just nice to each other. It's not very complicated. People have asked repeatedly what my politics are around this, and my politics are very basic, that civilians of any country should be able to have very boring lives. Get up, go to work, moan about their boss, talk about last night's TV, kids turn up having not done their homework, being made to tidy their room twice so they didn't walk the dog. That's my politics. So being in this position of explaining that there are other ways of viewing the word Zionist, I think.
So I'm hearing you say that you feel you personally have been able to engage across divides and help provide a much more nuanced understanding for people who just want to put you in a box and have a solely horrifically negative idea of the term.
I mean, I can't speak for all Jews. I can't even speak for all religious Jews, or even all modern Orthodox Jews, or even all modern Orthodox Jews who grew up in Essex and live in Barnet. Do you know what I mean? Like, we all have 2 Jews, 78 opinions. But it's an opportunity. And also, since October 7th, most of my material's Jewish, but I kind of have dumped everything else because I feel that I got a platform such as it is. And I can show someone who is comfortable in their skin. I didn't pick my identity, but I don't see why I have to feel shame about it. There's a lot of pressure to feel shame and to be silent and to quietly disappear. So, for example, I'm still applying for all the gigs offered by all the people who aren't booking me, because I want them every time to make a conscious choice not to have me there.
You know what? Can I make a suggestion to you? If you become a rabbi, you can accept gigs on Friday night.
I sort of got the title at one point. It's not relevant to this, shall I very quickly say? Lovely J Cross School, I used to go in and do lots of stuff with them, and they commissioned for me one year to do something, a 3-minute Megillah for Purim, because not everyone has lots of concentration. I also someone with no concentration, so I created a 3-minute Megillah, a little film, and it was just a fun thing. It's come in and present it. There'll be 3 groups. So I went to the first group, the lower school, years 7 to 9, and the teachers said, Rabbi Rachel, because they used to, whoever's speaking about the Jews, Rabbi Rachel's here to introduce her thing. So I was like, oh, I'm not a rabbi, I'm just religious, whatever. And then it was the middle school, same thing happened, Rabbi Rachel, and I said, I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a rabbi. And then when it was the 6th form, it was the same. So I said to the 6th form, and I know loads of them because they go to my shul, I said to them, I'm going to teach you something now, proper Judaism. In our culture, we have a concept called a chazakah. If something happens 3 times, it's fixed. And then 3 times, and that's what I'm going to answer to from now on.
It's fantastic. Now, John, you're somebody who likes to tell uncomfortable truths, aren't you? I haven't met you before, but I get that sense. I'm wondering how you navigate some of, creating an environment where people can genuinely listen to each other, even when they disagree, in your yeshiva and in your community here.
I think we're all finding that very, very hard at the moment. We're all finding it really hard. And many rabbis are steering away from having those conversations because they're scary and we're worried about community cohesion, and every time we do try and talk about it, it leads to negative outcomes as opposed to positive outcomes. But we should be talking about this. We should be talking about it. It should be on the agenda. And because Israel needs the voice of the diaspora. And we need to hear each other. We need to hear each other say impossible things. And we need to listen carefully to each other, respectfully to each other. So there needs to be rules in those kinds of... you're an expert in this stuff, that's your thing. But we're not... It's partly because the black and white, for us or against us, world has kind of swamped us from the outside. We keep thinking we're being looked at by people who don't like us. And we need to sometimes make sure the doors are closed and that we're amongst friends and that we can, in the company of friends who care and love and support each other, we can say what we need to say and listen to each other carefully. Like we do with our lovers and wives and partners. Like when the doors are closed, you have to say what you need to say from the kishkas. And sometimes that's miserable. It's always miserable, but there's things you need to say, and then you move on through saying the hard things to a deeper understanding and communication with each other. And in this case, the lack of communication is totally tragic for the Jewish community.
I'll make a comment there, which is over the last couple of years, I've had a certain amount of hate mail, and a certain amount of what I call needling mail. You fail to talk out, so you're like the moral cowards, or how dare you say this, or whatever. None of it has been from non-Jews. None of it.
I've had lots of it from non-Jews, so I've got yours. I've had to have the police round for some of them. Yeah, it's gone.
I've had the CST round because of threats from fellow Jews.
Yeah, I have Jews tell me face to face they don't do it quietly. You don't speak out about this, you go from all directions, but and on social media, my husband was taken very ill on the 6th of October 2023, and we were in hospital for some time, and he's fine now, I should have said. Don't worry, it's all good. I had people who knew that, who were my colleagues and peers who knew me well, shouting at me on social media, sending me messages, constantly going, why aren't you speaking out? Why aren't you speaking out? And then I had people in the Jewish community, why aren't you speaking out? Why aren't you speaking out? So I get from everybody, that means I'm saying something right.
So I'm wondering what we can do to create spaces of more psychological safety where we can have more real, authentic discussions without cancelling people. Jonathan?
Very, very interestingly, we were privileged to have Professor Uriel Simonson in our community yesterday. A number of people here will have heard him. A number of people here will have heard Professor Uriel Simonson, he has a dialogue for interfaith work in Haifa University. And Haifa is a mixed city. And he talked about how he brought people together. First of all, undercover 25 Jewish, across the denominations, Muslim, Druze and Christian leaders. And he said, we didn't talk politics. We talked about the fact that we're living in the same city. And what he had to emphasize there was what was of value was not the you think that, I think this, but the creation of relationships that forced people to recognize the humanity of the other person and their needs to be respected and in a shared space. And out of that came the capacity to listen more deeply to each other. It was very interesting that that's what he emphasized. Don't go for the politics, go for the relationships. And I'm just taking that away from yesterday. I'm not quite sure what to, how to build on it, but it struck me as important.
My industry has started forming Jewish groups for people in entertainment. They're sort of very splintered off into your specialism, because if you're working in news and documentary, you're having different problems than if you're working in fashion or if you're working in music. To some extent, the manner in which things come about is like different. But also, I run a support group for Jews at the Fringe. It's been around for a few years. It used to be a support group. It used to just be a social group. It used to be kind of shared on a sort of whisper network of, oh, you're a Jew, like occasionally we meet up, or if you've got a question, Rachel will give you soup and look after you. And last year it became something a bit more structured. And then this year we decided to make it a public group. To register it as one of the Fringe's subgroups. You can have, they call them community groups, officially as part of the Fringe. You get a meet-up in the Fringe Central. They provide you with vegetarian food and snacks. I asked the lady who makes the food for the shul to also make us cakes. It was quite good. But the other thing that I did was I always put out if anyone wants to come for a Shabbat dinner, a Shabbat lunch, let me know, and I'll sort you out. It's not about being religious. Sometimes it's nice to be with your peeps. And this year, bearing in mind it's not really inhabited by religious Jews, the Edinburgh Fringe, we had like 14, 16 people coming with Shabbat meals just to be in a safe space.
I think it's fantastic. Well done you for doing it.
It's everyone.
I'm wondering whether there's also some internal work that all of us have to do in order to be in a place to be able to listen to views that we find really difficult. Because often when we're feeling defensive and scared and angry, when we're facing somebody else who thinks differently, we're not open to listen to them, we're dealing with all our own shadows. And what we might start to do to begin to deal with our own stuff in order to be open to other people. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so maybe to just push back on the question of shame, I think it's perfectly legitimate to be ashamed of what Israel's doing at the moment. That sounds like a reasonable response, if that's what you feel. And on Yom Kippur, we're not going to say I'm not ashamed. We're going to say Ashamdu. We're going to say I'm ashamed, and we're going to have a significant part of our prayers in the Musaf atoning for the sins of our leadership. So of course we should be ashamed. Shame is totally central to a Jewish way of thinking about self-change. Like, if you're not ashamed of something, how will you stop doing it?
It's very interesting you should say that, because my understanding of shame is it often closes us down.
Maybe that's because we live in a strange Christian country where we don't talk about sin enough. And sin is horribly loaded and freighted with all sorts of weird stuff. But Jews talk about sin lightly. Like, sin is when you don't live up to the standards the standards of your community, and if you don't live up to the right standards, then you should be ashamed. And if you're a member of a Masorti Kehillah, it means you're a member of a community which sets quite high standards. And so shame should be a constant part of our lives. So to be ashamed of, ashamed of not keeping Shabbat, or ashamed of whatever, but if we expect the highest moral standards of the Israeli army, you don't think they're living up to those standards, then you should be ashamed. That sounds totally reasonable to me. Like, that's good. Shame is good. The question then is what you do with it. The question is what you do next. And you don't wallow in it. The question is about the thrust of the Yamin Noraim is to move out of shame and into activity, to feel potent, to feel like you can change both yourself and your world. So that you need to get involved in doing the things that you need to do. So if you're worried about the world in terms of dialogue, you should be involved in dialogue. If you're worried, this country has got some serious problems around dialogue at the moment. The rise of reform, which is in some ways to do with the fact that we've taken our eye off the ball of talking to normal British people about what they're worried about. Like normal British people about what they're worried about. And we've demonised them instead of listening to them. And we need to learn how to listen to each other very, very carefully. So if you're ashamed about not doing that, then you need to get out and do it.
I think it's a different understanding of the word shame, because I think a lot of people see shame as something which can be paralysing, whereas you're talking about a type of shame which is more sensitive and more compassionate and can lead to action.
I'm thinking of, shame is part of the essence of Teshuvah, and we're in the middle of the days of Teshuvah, but it leads to remorse and the question of moral responsibility. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this evening is because the thought that Yom Kippur will just go by as normal and we carry on the same as before and kind of fake it on the day when we are standing before our God in judgment really, really bothers me. But I think there's I want to make a differentiation here. I think there's a difference. A number of people during this year, for the first time in my career, have wished to be ashamed of being Jewish. Now, I think there's a difference between being ashamed about specific things and then saying, this is wrong, and what's my part in it. I'm absolutely not ashamed of being part of a moral tradition with an immense resilience and a phenomenal amount to teach each and every one of us. So I want to say to people, be proud of being Jewish and keep our sense of guilt, remorse, shame for very specific things that we're then committed to engage with morally. And by the way, I think it's also important what we say to the non-Jewish world, because if you look at the pictures much of the non-Jewish world gets about what's happening in Israel, if the voices of Jewish leadership are silent, people will say, okay then, that's what Judaism really is, isn't it? And that puts the moral reputation of Judaism on the line. And I think silence is not an okay response.
Yeah, I think that the response... I think that's an outrageous thing to say. I'm ashamed of being Jewish. That's an outrageous thing to say.
But that's what some people
I
feel.
understand, but it sounds like
I don't think they entirely mean it in the way it might come
Well, I
across.
think the reason why I use that harsh language is because like it's just look, I think it's totally right to be ashamed of what Jews are doing. It's totally right, and if that shame can be turned positively into action, like we've taken our eye off the ball in the West. Western Jews. We've taken our eye off the ball. Do we think that building a liberal, democratic state based on liberal Zionism is going to be something that will just happen by itself? There's an awful lot of people pushing for a version of Zionism which is profoundly fundamentalist and dark and based on violence. And those people have no problem in inculcating and indoctrinating their children with those values. And do we think we don't have to create a potent community that believes in liberal Zionism and then teach that and then use that? We should be flooding Israeli institutions that have a different vision of what Israel is with resources and with support. If we want to build Israel to be a certain way, we need to work damn hard to make sure that Israel becomes the Israel that we want it to be. Israel's an embarrassing place to live as a Masorti Jew. Like one of the most embarrassing things, whenever I conduct a wedding in Israel, it's illegal. It's illegal for me to conduct a wedding because the state has authorized a particular version of Judaism to be sanctioned and other forms not to be accepted. That's embarrassing. That's an appalling thing. I don't live in Israel because I like it. I live in Israel because there's so much work to do. The swamps still need draining in Israel. The swamps still need draining. It used to be that we sent 18-year-olds to drain swamps 100 years ago. But the swamps still need draining. There's so much work to do in Israel to create a decent society out there.
Change the image. The Society of Protection of Nature in Israel is just re-wetting the swamps to restore wildlife. But I get what you mean. But look, your friend and mine, we're both close to him, Rabbi Arik Ashman, who missed Rosh Hashanah because he got arrested for a protective presence on the West Bank. It's much easier, it seems, to inculcate thuggery than the readiness to put yourself on the line for liberal Jewish values. I think we've both been out with him several times. It's actually quite frightening. And he wrote his piece after Rosh Hashanah. Said, I broke my basic own rules in that I was alone in this place where I got arrested. That is not allowed. But the reason I'm alone is nobody else would come with me for protective presence of these Palestinian villages at night because nobody else has volunteered. So, people from this community have. But there's a good example of strength that's needed.
And I should atone for that because I wasn't there. My friends were.
Likewise.
But I just want to say one thing about anti-Semitism, just to come back to that question. Just start for the last 2,000 years, I think basically the Jews did nothing and then victimised and picked on. They just didn't do anything. Like, anti-Semitism was this weird thing where people thought the Jews were doing stuff, and people hated us anyway, even though we weren't doing anything wrong. That's not true now. We're potent, we're active, we do terrible things, and we do great things, we do amazing things, we do awful things. Like, we have a state now that does terrible and awful things and wonderful things. We have a state. So, anti-Semitism can't be the same beast as it was 200 years ago. It might feel the same. It might come sneaking out and feel the same, but it isn't the same. It's not the same. Maybe this is now I'm going to say something that's crazy because I'm with my Israeli hat on, but it's like it's not the same because we are guilty now of doing stuff. And when you're guilty, then people should be angry with you because of the things that you did. That's not anti-Semitic, that's just being angry with the Jews because they're doing terrible things. So that I can see lots of shaking heads.
No, I'm just wondering.
So again?
Isn't that your Anglo hat, not your Israeli?
Yeah, maybe that's my Anglo hat, but it is different. I don't know how to explain. I think that we're living in a different world, that's all. And the tremendous moral possibilities Like David Hartman at Alava Shalom, who was my teacher, said that the religious significance of the state of Israel was that it radically expanded the range of worlds where Jewish religious life is active. So the reason why throughout the last 2,000 years rabbis have learned, Orthodox rabbis have learned as part of their ordination the laws of Shabbat and the laws of Kashrut and the laws of family purity, Tarat HaMishpacha, is because for the last 2,000 years the realm of worlds where Jews had potency extended about as far as whether you kept the Sabbath and what you ate and when you had sex with your wife. And that was about the limit of Jewish potency. Because we were living under the authority of people who made all the real decisions about war and peace and government and social services and all that kind of stuff. Well, in the state of Israel, we run an army and we run the health service. And those things fall under Jewish, in some way under Jewish control. And we can fail at how we run the army. So that the stakes are 1,000 times higher than they were before 1948. Now we have to atone for proper big things. That's a massive change in the world. That's guilt. We have to feel guilt for the things that we do. That's amazing. That's like in the biblical times when you could feel guilt for the terrible things that your king did. So that's a massive change in the world. But that's good. Because it's good to have power. Because power is good.
I'm wondering for both of you as rabbis, and perhaps also for you, Rachel.
Rabbi Rachel.
Whether I'm getting a sense that there's that extra weight of responsibility to grapple with these, impossible conundrums and to speak out.
Yes. And it's not, can't duck that. And it's really painful. And some of the things I've written, I don't know why, the pressure's built up inside, and the moment comes to just burst, and I've written them very, very quickly. And then I've got plenty of time to have sleepless nights about them afterwards. And some of them I really worry about and think about really carefully. There is an obligation for the sake of my own people, and there is an obligation, I think, towards the non-Jewish world as well. And it's quite, we're on the line.
For me, I feel like one-to-one conversations or small group conversations are things that are powerful and effective, and that's where I try and put my focus. I don't think anyone's ever changed their mind because they read a really brilliantly worded tweet or or a meme. I don't think that changes anything. I think human to human is what makes changes, and I think that I agree actually with you, Joel, about the fact that we're in different circumstances now. But I also feel that the way that the rest of the world has chosen to scapegoat every Jew, Jews who might be very anti-Israel, or Jews who can't vote in Israel, or Jews who've never been to Israel or grew up. I have a friend who grew up with no connection whatsoever to Israel. It wasn't a thing in her family, and in terms of how people have bombarded her to have an opinion because her heritage as Jewish, not practicing in any way, has led her to be a very vocal opponent of what's happening in Israel, because that's her experiences. I didn't have any connection to this, but now look what it's doing. We're very complex people, which is great for comedy. But we're very complex people, and I think the anti-Semitism that's the same is that there are people who wait for there to be an excuse, or will find their own excuse for their hate. Whereas the issues with Israel are another thing. The things that happened with me and my peers over the summer, Israel was an excuse for behaviour. We aren't representing Israel other than as an excuse.
You also get, it's people also who've got no skin in the game and no knowledge, which is really maddening. I get a lot of environment magazines, get the Ecology magazine, and they had a headline, so and so many days since the G word. I decided I'll count them back. And the first was the 7th of October. And ever since then, I've been trying to delete everything I get from them, even though I care about the issue. And it's that, for people who are serious, people whose heart aches, people who are involved in the suffering about it, that's one thing. People who kind of just use it in the way they don't talk about Ukraine or don't talk about Somalia, that's where it feels profoundly unjust.
Just going back to that point, Joel, about the necessity or the pressure that, as Jonathan was talking about, to speak out, and I'm wondering, with all these different geographical and communal hats that you're juggling, if you can juggle hats, whether you feel that pressure and how you exercise it, if you do.
I think it's complicated. Yeah, sometimes. It's scary. It's scary because we're all responsible for holding our institutions together as well. So we on the one hand, there's a kind of moral, you're looking for clarity, and you're called upon for clarity. But on the other hand, you're wanting to make sure that you're creating spaces which hold everybody. And sometimes that involves a degree of self-muting, which is sometimes like cowardice. Almost indistinguishable from cowardice. And when Rabbi Jonathan comes and speaks at the yeshiva, he always comes and speaks with a very clear moral voice. And I'm always kind of, well, how do you do that? How do you speak with moral clarity? Because that's an institution that I'm working to hold together. So I have to be a kind of moral coward sometimes in that space to hold all the different voices together. But you're coming from the outside, and then I want you to just be as clear as you can on what it is that you really care about, and that sounds really important. I find it easier to say these things in your shul than I do in mine.
Because we've both got an exit. But I think there's a difference between saying what you just blatantly saying something and thinking through how it's possible to say something in such a way that it's hearable to a broad number of people and puts a point in a compassionate way that is listenable to from people who may not hold the same views. And I think there's a real responsibility in leadership to try and say things as best one can in a way that are hearable.
Because otherwise you get it off your chest, but it actually doesn't land with people who you most need to meet, to reach. I'm aware that it would be lovely to hear some brilliant but brief questions and comments from the floor.
Can I possibly just quickly respond to that before we do that? Because I was thinking about this thing of holding the community, and with my Jews at the Fringe, the Jew group, they held me as much as I held them. And I think actually we, the community members, we also have a responsibility to hold our leadership. It can't just be from one direction. These are difficult times, and the responsibility is on all of us to hold each other and our different opinions and our who does this, who does that. It's a communal responsibility, not just a leadership.
It's a beautiful point. Thank you very much for that, Rachel. Do people want to make quick questions, brilliant and brief? There's some roving microphones. I'll hear from a couple of people and then return to the panel. Anybody? There's a lady over here and another lady in the front row over here. And someone at the back as well. So why don't we hear from the three of you?
Who's the lady here?
Ah.
I'm frightened how you're going to come back at me when I say what I'm going to say. To me, Judaism is to do with morality and values, and that doesn't matter whether you're English or Israeli, but coming from an Israeli point of view, I'm going through hell because I don't believe in a two-state solution, because I think that if we had it, we're going to be living under stress and fear for the rest of our lives. So I'm having a problem putting all the bits and pieces together.
I think you're not alone in terms of that.
Yeah, I just wondered what you think we should do about the fact that the National Union of Teachers or Nurses or whoever it is, will spend time talking about Israel when it's not relevant to the work that they do, and it's it's really worrying. It's all of my teacher friends have left their union. They're not in their union anymore. They're not represented.
Thank you for that. And there's a gentleman at the very back, I think.
Hello. A simple question, just an aspect of practice. When you feel like you're lost at sea in this crazy time we're living in, what's something you do to hold yourself back to the floor, perhaps?
Thank you for that. I'm really glad you asked that question, because I did want to have a bit of time to go to the panel and talk about, how to manage some of these conundrums that we've been talking about. So I'm very delighted you asked that question, and we'll just take one more from Judith at the back over there.
This is a question specifically for Rabbi Jonathan. It suddenly dawned on me how liberating it would be for you at the end of the year not to have to represent this community, and I wondered whether you'd given any thought as to how that might change how you speak.
She was asking about whether Rabbi Jonathan, whether the question of liberation of no longer at a time in the future representing the community, and whether that feels like a moment of liberation. Let's just have one more quick thought from this gentleman in the middle, and then we'll turn to the panel. This is a more running, thank you so much for that.
Thank you. That was a wonderful discussion on the problem that we have. It's a huge problem, who knows? But the question is really, what does leadership do to give a plan for the future? How do we handle that? That's the other part of the discussion, which hasn't been dealt with.
Yeah.
We've only dealt with the problem.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. So let's kick off over there, because it's also similar to the question that the other gentleman raised, and talk a bit about what we do, what you guys do as leaders, three rabbis over here.
Oh, I thought you were going to take it. So, no liberation, as far as I'm concerned, partly because I'll remain senior rabbi of the Masorti movement, and partly because I haven't been failing to say what I really believe just because I'm rabbi of this congregation. And I think, I am absolutely passionate about my commitment to Judaism, and a particular kind of Judaism, and I have no intention of relinquishing that for one moment. We're not empowered to be able to solve the political problems of the world, but we are empowered to use whatever influence we have to, in the most compassionate and just way we can. And that's a responsibility we have to step up to and take. We take it as Jews, we take it as human beings. I'm going to make a very quick comment, on the question of the unions. My wife, Nicola Solomon, was, for many years, she was CEO of the Society of Authors, which is the trade union for writers. She persistently maintained that it was not the business of the Society of Authors to talk about Gaza or Israel. And I think there's a failure of knowing how to curate public spaces in all kinds of arenas in a way that is safe for all people, and to make it clear that whereas topics are not forbidden in private conversation, they're not what that organisation exists for.
Can we go back to the solution question, though? Allow you to... I'm just keen to have two questions, and I want people to leave with some hope and some ideas on navigating some of all these challenges that we've been discussing.
I don't think that we're empowered here to have solutions to the major political problems of Israel. Joel says, go live there and vote. But I think we are empowered to study, deepen, live by our Judaism. That will give us communal strength, moral strength, and resilience, and also take us out into the world in all kinds of ways that articulate important values. And that's, I think, what we have to do.
When you say take us out into the world, you mean?
I mean, be advocates within our own societies for justice, compassion, the image of God in every human being, the sense that it's God's created world, there's enough work in that for 1 million lifetimes.
Thank you. Rachel.
I feel that I need the questions really spelled out for me, sorry.
Well, no, we've just been talking about the challenges. You've already been alluding to some solutions yourself in terms of your work reaching out to fellow Jews in entertainment industry and also having one-to-one difficult conversations, challenging conversations, something you personally can do, and also to inspire the people here in the room.
I mean, one of the things is I've curated a non-echo chamber social media that I've put, well, that's not entirely true. I feel myself to be, in my way, a peace activist. So I've looked for other voices who are peace activists, even if they're from different perspectives, or I follow a number of Palestinian activists because I want to know how they see the future and what they feel would work. Otherwise it's just a little echo chamber. And I think that's helpful, and that's helped me to have different kinds of conversations than if I was just in my little Jewish bubble. And the little Jewish bubble is also quite a challenging space in many ways. I think what I do is really what I said before, is that I feel I've been put into an interesting position for someone like me to be on TV, on the radio, gigging in pubs and clubs around the country. I have an opportunity and a responsibility to represent our community the best way that I can represent myself, which is with pride. I'm on stage. I wear the dog tags, I wear yellow ribbons, I wear Magen David. My show that I've been touring, I'll wear them on the radio. That doesn't mean people listen to radio can see it, but they always do photos. But the TV doesn't let you. But I'll wear them for the photos before and after, and that's very powerful. But it's also, I think, I'm not sure who said it actually before, but ordinary people find it very bizarre that this country is so obsessed with this subject. And wherever I perform, I get at the end, like in normal clubs and pubs, at the end of the shows, I have two types of people who come and talk to me: hidden Jews. Actually that's three types of people. We'll have Jewish as an answer. Three types of people. Hidden Jews, so Jews who don't tell people they're Jewish right now. Jews who won't go to clubs unless they know there's a Jew performing because they're too scared of what's going to be said, and it makes them comfortable. And non-Jewish people who say, we hate the way that Jewish people are made to feel in this country. We don't understand why everyone's so obsessed with it. It's really terrible. It's got nothing to do with us. My family, I did a gig somewhere up north, and someone said, we're like from an old mining family. We've got members of our family who are kind of 3 generations unemployed. Our kids haven't had the same teacher for more than 2 weeks in the last 3 years. You can't get an appointment in the hospital to have your cancer treated. I don't understand what all the fuss is about things happening somewhere else. And I think that's really quite important to hold on to.
Yeah, balancing all those things. Thank you.
So in the middle of the 11 days of the war with Iran, there were flights bringing Israelis home back to Israel from the diaspora. They were called rescue flights. That's hilarious. Yeah. They're rescuing you from London so that you can go and sit in a bomb shelter and have someone try and kill you. And Israelis were serious about that. They were serious about that. Well, I think what they mean by that is that if you're in a bomb shelter and you're cowering and the ground shaking, then you know that, and then you know that there is profound social cohesion, that we're together as a community experiencing something. And that's not just the Jews in Israel, that's the Jews and the Arabs in Israel. My daughter was in an air raid shelter at her place of work in a care home, a social worker, and there was an air raid, and everyone was in the shelter, lots of Arab co-workers, and one of them turns to the other and says, as the rockets are coming over from Hezbollah in the north, and one of the Arab co-workers turns to another one and says something in Arabic, and she and my daughter asked what they'd said, and they said, I said, Lama Tzahal lo horeg otam. Why doesn't the army deal with that? Why doesn't the army kill those people? Our army. Right, there is there's social cohesion in Israel between Jews and Arabs. I was at a peace conference recently in Jerusalem with thousands of people there, full of Israeli Arabs, saying that we're your partners for this conversation. There is a future for dialogue. There is a future for dialogue. Thousands of people. A few other things. So, the rescue flight is because the scariest thing, I suppose, from an Israeli perspective, is someone forcing you to negate your identity in order to be acceptable in British society. Like, in order to pass in British society, for you to say that I'm not a Zionist or I'm not Jewish. That seems like an intolerable game to play in a world where you want to be able to hold your head up high. That sounds like an intolerable place to be. And that's a place you want to get out of. I don't mean leaving Britain. I mean dealing with the problem. Like if that's the problem you need to deal with, boy, do you have hard work to do. You better roll your sleeves up, because there are serious issues to deal with in British society if Jews are having to pass in order to be acceptable within this society.
I'm so sorry not to be able to take a question, because I know that you all have lives to go to, but I mean, what a fascinating discussion. I just wrote down a few things that really stood out for me, is that for the last 2,000 years, Jews are being picked on for nothing, but that isn't true any longer. Anti-Semitism is a very different beast to 2,000 years ago. We are brilliant, but we're also guilty for doing terrible things. And that force alone is inadequate to keep us safe. Survival also depends on mortality. Morality, sorry, not mortality, morality.
Everything depends on mortality.
Not so much. And that you talked about the importance of dialogue and the lack of communication that is really tragic for the Jewish community, and the importance of creating better relations in order that people can see the humanity in the other. And sometimes rabbis are steering away from conversations, but you guys need to hear, and we all need to hear, other people say impossible things. And at the same time, you're playing a difficult game, because you also have responsibility to hold institutions together. And sometimes there's cowardice, and yet you do need to speak out with moral clarity and with compassion and help people listen to difficult things while still holding those two worlds and holding the institution together. And sometimes silence is not an okay response. And sometimes we just need to go big or go home. So, thank you so much to comedian Rick. I'm just aware that some people might want to go home now, but if you want to talk to people, please feel free to come and have a word with them. But I'm sure that some other people need to go home now. So please come and have a chat.